I think one of the things that I learned about that is that I'm not immune from the astrological combinations, and also I should have known when to shut up. So I think those are the kinds of things that you find uh, easy to learn in retrospect and difficult to let me just switch these. I'm sorry. And difficult to correct. So, but I think we're kind of past that now. I'm going to change the time. Hold on a second. You know, fix the time on the clock. All right. So let me just, so I'm having to do this with finger. But basically right now, what we have is, so I'm going to make sure you guys can all see this. I'm going to stop the share and start the screen again, start the share screen again. So thank God I have this finger pointing. Thank God I have a touch screen now, which is, which is fancy because the mouse isn't working properly. So I have to figure out what's wrong with that. All right. So essentially, what we have right now is a combination of four. Yeah, this was also when Mercury was retrograde. So again, it was like a combination of patterns, and we may have found ourselves in those kinds of patterns, those kind of circular thought patterns. Also, it made because Saturn's aspecting Sun and Jupiter, that's the kind of a position that makes most of us tend to hunker down in our positions and hunker down into patterns of behavior we've held for years and not willing to bend. Okay. So I think one of the things you have with this particular combination is, and also the moon's in Scorpio right now. So this is kind of it's kind of a negative time right now, to be honest with you, because Saturn's aspecting Scorpio. The moon is in a good nakshatra. It's in Jyeshtha nakshatra, which is the oldest and wisest nakshatra. So that's why I'm having this kind of a reflective moment. But one thing you'll see is, especially in politics, is you'll see this simultaneous freezing and loosening of perspectives. And what do I mean by that? Well, basically, you have perspectives coming up which have been, I would say, frozen in place by certain countries and governments and cultures. So let's say what's happening in Argentina, what's happening in Australia with censorship, what's happening in Scotland with censorship, what's happening in the United States in terms of the election, and so that Saturn aspect on Sun, Jupiter, and Venus will also affect the courts. So this doesn't mean that I'm anti or pro anybody, but that it's sort of like a clash, so nobody's really going to admit they're wrong or right. We really won't see that until at the best early May, which is right around the corner. It's the middle of next week when Jupiter changes signs from Aries into Taurus. So right now you can see it's in the box next to the upper left-hand side. That JP is Jupiter. It's with the Sun, is with Venus. Jupiter and Venus are the two most legal planets. Saturn aspecting those gives judgments. And I think over the next week, we'll see some judgments which will have us kind of saying, that's not what we've been told. But I think one of the things that I also encourage people to do is when you have Saturn aspecting Jupiter, there's a tendency to go with what I would call consensus opinion. And Jupiter's also influencing Mercury and Mars. So there's an exchange of lords. It's what's called a Parivartana yoga, which is very familiar to Vedic astrologers. And Vedic astrology essentially, it's an exchange of lords between signs. So what that means in plain English is that Mercury is in Jupiter's sign and Mars is in Jupiter's sign. So I made a mistake there. And Jupiter is in Mars sign. So those two combinations give and Rahu's influencing that. And it's also influencing Mercury. So we have a combination for lying from government and media. Okay. And like I said, this is universal. This isn't one group versus another group. This is universal. And that Saturn aspect on Jupiter won't admit either side to say they're wrong or right. Saturn's more clearly aspecting Jupiter because it's closer in degree, and it's more clearly aspecting the moon because it's closer in degree to where the moon is. So Saturn's at 22 degrees, 8 minutes in Aquarius, is aspecting Scorpio moon at 25 degrees, 37 minutes, and also aspecting Jupiter at 29 degrees, 8 minutes. It's also throwing, because Vedic astrology allows for whole sign aspects, Saturn is also aspecting Sun and Venus. So the element of fairness tends to get taken out of a lot of this. That's one of the problems with these combinations. And the interest in lying tends to, for gain, tends to take massive importance. So all these planets, Saturn, Mars, Mercury, Rahu, Venus, Jupiter, Sun, and Moon, everything in this chart is interlinked right now. And they're linked either indirectly or directly with Saturn. So Saturn has this reputation of destroying whatever it looks at. So our cognitive abilities are very weak right now. Our judgment is very weak right now. Definitely not a time for new decisions, at least not until May 1st, okay, when Jupiter will make us more reasonable. Also, there's a tendency to lie because of the Mars-Mercury-Rahu conjunction. This is especially coming from larger institutions, from government, to a certain extent from media. I think I've told you before, the United States chart is not good for media. It tends to, all media is sensationalistic to a certain degree, but US media is incredibly sensationalistic. So that's why we're seeing essentially this, what I would call microcosmic examination of the Trump trials, Joe Biden's trips around the country, essentially everything that we can see as being micromanaged. The yogi point is Pisces, so there is a certain amount of misrepresentation about the economy, okay? because the yogi point is at 12 degrees, 35 minutes of Pisces, is right between Mars and Mercury. And we are heading for, there are some indicators which indicate we are heading for an economic letdown in May. I sincerely hope this does not happen. Okay. I hate economic slowdowns. I think they're damaging from 1,000 different perspectives, especially in terms of attitude, in terms of optimism, things like that. But it does look like it's coming. So I hope, and like I said, this is one of the things I desperately hope I'm wrong about. Okay. The other thing that I'm looking at is because Mars rules wars and conflicts, and Venus rules victories and wars. Essentially, what you have is we're not going to have a clear determination of who is winning and who is losing for the next couple of months. Okay, in the various conflicts. Also, one of the interesting things I find from this chart is this kind of explains the Mars Mercury Rahu conjunction with Mercury debilitated, kind of explains the higher education protests that are happening around the country. I'm not necessarily saying they're right or wrong, but they're also a bit confused, to be honest. You know, if I'm perfectly honest in my assessment of the chart. And they're also, so Rahu is essentially a planet connected with revolution, disruption, and Mercury is to a certain extent connected with lies. Saturn, Venus, Saturn aspecting Sun, Venus, and Jupiter. Saturn aspecting Venus and Jupiter actually encourages hate crimes. If I'm being quite blunt with you, so this has essentially everything and nothing to do with what's happening in Israel and Ukraine. This has more to do with people's perceptions of what's happening in Israel and Ukraine. And I'm not saying what's happening there is justifiable by any stretch of the imagination. But it's disruptive. That's maybe the best way I can put it without really ticking anybody off. Is misguided because of the Saturn aspect on Jupiter and Venus. And it's, so I'm not saying the protesters are wrong. I'm saying that they're picking the wrong targets in the countries in which they're protesting. Let's put it that way. They're not, some of them are focusing on the governments, which is really the appropriate target. But when you start focusing on groups, that gets really, really frightening to me. Okay, so hopefully Jupiter moves into Taurus. We'll get a little bit wiser about that. Venus moves into Taurus within about 3 to 4 weeks. We'll get a little bit wiser about that. Mercury moves into Aries within about a week and a half at the outside. So Mercury moves very quickly. And Mars is going to stay there, essentially spreading violence or upticking violence. And I'm wondering if, so I was looking at the eclipse in September and October as being a more dangerous eclipse than the one that just occurred. And I'm thinking back to the late 60s when there were riots and people taking over cities. You know, Paris was under attack, And I'm seeing certain parallels, and also there were riots across the United States connected with the Vietnam War, but also connected, really, to be honest with you, with the entire concept of colonialism and capitalism. Okay, so um, these were essentially um, the motivation was similar. It wasn't identical. The motivation was similar because it was essentially instigated by the Vietnam War, instigated by um, the conception that uh, the European powers the Europeans in the United States were abusing their powers. A lot of them were extraordinarily anti-capitalist, and so again, there are similar markings between the 68 to 70 riots and uh, the campus demonstrations that are happening right now. And I'm wondering if you'll have some kind of a repeat with what happened in Chicago in 1968 at the Democratic Convention in this year in terms of large demonstrations of both the Republican and the Democratic conventions. So I think this is going to be an interesting election cycle, barring anything connected with Trump. The trial, I haven't. I know we're right on top of it, but Jupiter moving into Taurus may give us a clearer idea after May 1st of what actually happens in this particular trial. And I think because Jupiter's going over Trump's 10th house, it looks positive for him to be able, I'm honest with you. It also moves into Biden's 7th house, so Biden will get more allies. So it's kind of a wash for them politically. But I do see a lot of, again, a continuing upset of elected leaders. I'm also seeing a continuing process of trying to censor speech. I'm also seeing, so we have the TikTok bill passed last week. I'm not a big fan of TikTok, but I think that has implications for a lot of other providers, which worries me. And also, there's a fragmentation of what I would call absolutist free speech, and that bothers me. Just because I tend to believe in free speech, I think it's essential. I think we've suffered by not having enough active and honest discourse in this country over the past 30 years or so. And also, I think you're starting to see a decline in culture wars because I think more and more people, especially as Mars moves through the zodiac all the way through the summertime into Gemini in particular, you'll see a growing interest in law and order, which is not really promising for any country, really, to be honest with you. That's really not. But I think what's happened is the spectrum has swung too far the other way. And Mars is in Pisces, so anything goes right now. And what happens when anything goes too far, people will start to get sick of it, and they'll start to shut down things. So again, this is not necessarily a doom and gloom forecast. This will actually restore some stability to the world, which is needed for discussion. And it will also, I think, tend to calm people down a little bit, but it will feel, to be honest with you, because people have had so much people have had power for the past 4 or 5 years, that power will be curtailed. Okay. And I think you'll see more suppression of internet activity over the next couple of months. And also talking about more mundane things, more communications breakdowns because of Mercury being afflicted by Saturn, more potential Earth catastrophes because of K2 in Virgo, and more shutdowns, more electrical and communication shutdowns over the next couple of months. I hope that doesn't go on for too long, and I hope it doesn't draw any negative reactions from governments. One thing I can look to with this Saturn in Aquarius is that it will increase scientific research. You're going to see a lot of big scientific discoveries come through, and I think that'll be positive. All right, so I have to check my time. So let's go through, but the governments which will have the most problems, I think, over the next few months are Ukraine, USSR, United States, Great Britain, China, France, Canada, and to a certain extent, Australia and Japan. Pakistan is in very tough shape. And that's a huge country. Number one, it's a huge country. It's got a huge population. It's adjacent to the largest populated country in the world, India. It's close to China. So those problems will spill over into India and China. And Northern Africa is also going to be a bit of a hotbed of activity as well. So we'll look at that at the end of the broadcast. I'm going to go through the zodiac signs, your individual zodiac signs, over the next week or so. And the Venus-Jupiter-Sun conjunction in Aries is actually positive for that sign. So this is April 15th to May 15th. So remember, everything gets pushed ahead to the middle of the month. And the Venus-Jupiter-Sun conjunction is actually quite positive. It gives luck, it gives romantic love, it gives increased ambition. But again, there is this tendency to waste money or to spend money. Inflation will continue, by the way, over the next few months. And food in particular will go up a lot this month. And let's see now. I'm judging that by the sun and the moon. The other thing is you have Saturn's in the 11th house. So I would advise Aries, sun, moon, rising signs to watch out their friends don't sap their energy or don't give them unnecessary burdens, excuse me. Moon is in the 8th house. There's a tendency for the sign to get a little bit depressed. K2's in the 5th, aspecting Mars, Mercury, and so there will be some feeling that your desires are put on the back burner, but it won't be a bad week for this sign. For Taurus, the Lord of the 1st house is in the 12th. Maybe over optimism and spending that may go away over the next week or so. And with Mercury in the 11th house, along with Rahu, be careful that your friends won't lie to you too much. Ketu's in the 5th house. Children will be a little bit difficult to deal with, a little bit high strung. Moon is debilitated in the seventh house. Relationship partners will feel a little bit moody or depressed. Saturn's in the 10th. There'll be a lot of focus on work for this sign. And finally, that about wraps it up for that particular sign. Venus, Sun in the 12th, some separation or some overspending by a relationship partner. For Gemini, Gemini has Aries in the 7th house. And I think from this chart, I'm sorry, Gemini has Sag in the 7th house. And for this chart, Jupiter's in the 11th house, so it should be good for gains. Career life will be a little bit restricted or a little bit hamstrung, though, but it will be, the sign will be very active. And Saturn's in the 9th house, a lot of work connected with financial gains. For the moon is in the 6th house. You'll have to watch out for health problems, maybe even operations are coming for this sign. For Cancer, Cancer has the Lord of the 7th and the 8th house, so relationship partners will be absent or not visible. Luck will be generally good, but people will lie to you about your chances of getting good things happening to you. Sun's exalted in the 10th house. That's very good for career. So career life should be good. But again, I'm feeling a little bit of being down on your luck because of the first Lord and the 5th. Leo has Sun in the 9th house. That's very good for luck, very good for career luck, along with Venus and Jupiter. So this should be a good luck time for this sign. Saturn's in the 7th. Relationship partners will be a little bit down or a little bit depressed. Mercury, Rahu, Mars in the 8th house. Some chance of deceit from investments. And Moon is in the 4th house, so some sadness or depression at home. K2 in the 2nd really isn't that critical for this sign because the Lord of K2 is Mercury is in the 8th house, and that makes finances difficult anyway. So finances won't be that spectacular, but luck will be great. There'll be a large ability to recoup finances. For Libra, Venus, Jupiter, Sun are in the 7th house. This will give improved relationships, although the sign will experience a lot of pressure. Moon's in the 2nd house. Good for financial growth, especially through career. Saturn's in the 5th. That's good for increased financial growth. Yeah, but again, very slowly. Mercury, Rahu, and Mars are in the 6th house, so you'll have enemies lying to you. Basically, that's maybe the best way to put it. K2's in the 12th, a lot of interest in spirituality and a lot of interest in financial growth. For Scorpio, Scorpio has Moon in the 1st house, so the sign will feel a little bit down this week. Saturn's aspecting Scorpio, so again, it will give that kind of a brain fog that we've gotten used to over the past few months. A lot of people with Sun or Moon and Scorpio tend to have, or other important planets in Scorpio are tending to have some memory retention problems. That's temporary, but it's going to last for about another year. But it's become most intense over the past few days. So you'll notice certain days of the week are better than others. For Mars is in the 5th house, along with Mercury and Rahu. So again, not bad for financial growth, but there will be a little bit of lying involved. Children will lie to you as well. Venus, Jupiter, and Sun are in the 6th house. Not a bad placement. This gives this sign a lot of courage, a lot of ambition, a lot of contact with doctors. K2's in the 11th house. Again, don't trust friends. For Sagittarius, Sagittarius has Jupiter in the 5th house, along with Sun and Venus aspected by Saturn. So actually not a bad combination. It's a good combination for financial growth, but kind of a difficult combination for children. And children will have some difficult times, and also some of the luck you built up through the years will tend to dwindle a little bit. Mars and Mercury and Rahu make the sign very unhappy and home. This is what's happening in the United States, just in general. And it's also ineffectual overseas or in work because of K2 being in the 12th or in the 10th house, excuse me, I'm sorry. And moon's in the 12th house, so be careful about it's actually not a bad combination. So you will get what's been promised you, but there may be some delays in terms of gains or legacies. Capricorn has Saturn in the second house. That's what's called a good dana or wealth producing yoga. And it aspects the fourth house, so there should be some financial gains through property. Mars and Mercury and Rahu will make one a little bit unrealistic about desires or ambitions, excuse me. But again, there will be this temptation to lie or to aggressively pursue what you want. K2's in the ninth house. People you get advice from or bosses will seem to be a little bit deceptive, but they're not really pulling anything over on you. They're just investigating things. And Sun, Jupiter, and Venus in the fourth house. That's a good Raj Yoga for this planet, good for financial growth and good for overcoming enemies. Actually, for Aquarius, it gets a bit better because that creates a really strong, that Venus, Jupiter, Sun combination gives really strong potential for financial growth. The Mars, Mercury, and Rahu will make the sign very dissatisfied with the money it has coming in, particularly connected with property or with speech. And Moon is in the 10th house, so this sign will feel a little bit depressed or let down about career. They'll feel a little bit hopeless about career. That'll pass fairly quickly. And let's see now, K2's in the 8th. A lot of interest in spirituality, but some unexpected health issues. So again, not a bad week for this rising sign, but again, beware the temptation to lie for money. It's not really a good thing to do. For Pisces has a Mars-Mercury conjunction, so it's a Dana Yoga or a wealth-producing combination. Venus, Jupiter, and Sun is also a wealth-producing combination for this rising sign, so it's good for money. Again, the temptation is to lie about it. The temptation is to misrepresent yourself in order to get what you want. Moon is in Scorpio. A lot of those lies will be figured out fairly quickly, so be careful. Don't try to do anything really until around the end of the week. Jupiter will be aspecting your ninth house of luck. Your luck will come naturally. You don't have to misrepresent anything. And finally, that's about it. Saturn in the 12th, too many expenses. Now let's go to the map. All right. And we're going to enlarge it. And see if we can work. Oh, let me see if I can get out of this way. All right, so this is a much better map. So I can't use the pointer, unfortunately. There will be some political scandal in Hawaii and Alaska. That's showing up very strongly. Also some danger of land loss in that part of the world. So when I say land loss or land, I really mean land fraud. So again, that's actually a story that's come out of Hawaii recently. So that's interesting. The moon is passing over New Mexico, Utah, and Washington State, and Idaho. So, and down to Mexico and down through Chile and Argentina. So there can be some depression or some economic anxiety in those states, in those places. Also, I would say bad publicity because the moon is a publicity planet. Saturn is passing through Louisiana. That to me is passing all the way actually from Wisconsin down to Louisiana and down close to the Yucatan Peninsula and also bordering on. So there's a Saturn and Mars uh, cluster um, in between Florida, Ohio, and Wisconsin. So this to me indicates bad economic news, and it's hitting Cuba and also Ecuador and uh, Panama. So watch out for those states and the adjacent states. So Pennsylvania could be hit too, and Virginia and North Carolina, all the way down to Georgia. There's Rahu is, so there's a Rahu Mars combination over in between Maine and let's see, Maine, Nova Scotia, covering Santo Domingo and Puerto Rico. And you'll see government scandals coming out in that part of the world, also in the United States, especially in the eastern part of the United States, so around Massachusetts, Maine, New York, Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., Virginia. So that's kind of indicative of where a lot of the political activity and the trials are being held. Okay, so this is interesting. It's happening there. Guyana is also under threat. As I've said before, Brazil is under threat, as I've said before. And we're getting false news out of Argentina. Venus is passing through the Amazon, so there should be some flooding down there, which makes sense. And the government in Brazil will be rather difficult to deal with. It will be a little bit oppressive. Jupiter's passing over the mid-Atlantic. It's hitting the east coast of Brazil, or close to the east coast of Brazil. And that will give, like I said, some government censorship impulses there. Iceland has a Saturn line going through it, so does Portugal, Spain, and Ireland. And there's also a moon line. So essentially, we're seeing downturns in those economies. This is hitting all the way into Libya and, I'm sorry, down into Algeria and all the way down into, and also some violence in France and also some violence in Algeria and Libya and down into the Congo and down into Western Africa, down into close to Ghana and Gabon. The other part is we have Rahu and Mercury lines, so there's misrepresentation happening all the way from South Africa up to Western Europe. So this will definitely affect Ukraine war. It's also passing through Turkey. This indicates some panic in the western part of Turkey, excuse me, and also up into Bulgaria, and again into Poland. Okay, and finally, we're looking at the west coast of Africa. There's a Venus line, so heavy rains. Interestingly enough, I predicted heavy rains for Saudi Arabia, but the United Arab Emirates got it last week. And let's see now, and into central Russia, close to Moscow. So, and Iran has the sun going over it, so does Saudi Arabia. And the regions directly to the north, I think that's Uzbekistan and one of the other stands, I'm forgetting them. I apologize. And through central Russia, So some economic slowdown, some challenge to governmental authority in Russia. There's a Jupiter line running through the the northwest part of India. So again, you'll see some government suppression in India and also in the Bengal region. Bengal region seems to be hit pretty hard. Pakistan is right between the two lines, the Jupiter Sun line. So that's really not a good place for it to be. And there's a Saturn line hitting down through Ladakh and Bangladesh. So those two countries we know are in financial hard straits. And finally, there's a Mars line. So this could indicate fighting in or arguments over land in Vietnam, Cambodia, and some governmental scandal happening in China and Borneo and Australia. And again, as we head towards Eastern Australia and all the way over to New Zealand, there's growing interest in government censorship. Australia has actually taken the line that it has the right to censor sites in other parts of the world. So this is kind of an interesting perspective for it to take. I understand why it's doing that, but it's really probably a little bit, it strikes me as overreach. All right, so that's it for me for this week. I love you all. The interviews are coming, and I think I ran over time. I hope I haven't. But I love you all, and thank you so much for watching. I couldn't do this without you. Take care of yourselves. Tough times over the next couple of months. Just hang in there. Things will get better. And I'm signing off for this week. Again, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with your friends or with anybody you think might be interested. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye, everyone. Take care of yourselves.